What would you do if at 3 a.m. a single father knocked on a stranger's door soaked in rain, desperate for help, and the woman who opened it looked at him like she'd been waiting her whole life? This isn't just a story about coincidence. It's about memory healing, and the kind of kindness that echoes across decades. Before we begin, if you love stories that touch the heart and stay with you long after they end, make sure to subscribe to our channel. Each week, we bring you true-to-life fiction that inspires, uplifts, and reminds us that hope often knocks when we least expect it. Now, let's begin. Single dad knocked on the wrong door at 3 a.m., but the woman said, "I've waited since 1998. The storm had been building for hours. Sheets of rain battered the narrow mountain road, swallowing the faded yellow lines and pounding the windshield like fists. Ethan's knuckles were white around the steering wheel. His old sedan, a stubborn relic from the late 90s, coughed with each climb, its engine groaning under the strain of the steep grade. In the back seat, Caleb stirred a thin, rasping sound escaping the boy's throat. His breath came in uneven gasps, wheezing like an old accordion. Ethan flicked a glance in the rearview mirror. "Hang in there, buddy." "We're almost there," he whispered. But he wasn't sure where there was anymore. His GPS had cut out miles ago, and with the rain lashing sideways and the road signs blurred, he could barely tell whether he was still on the right road or any road at all. Then the car shuddered. A jolt. A hiss. Ethan cursed under his breath and steered to the side. Steam rose from the hood. He jumped out into the downpour, heart racing. The radiator hose had finally given up. For a split second, Ethan wanted to scream. Not out of anger, but helplessness. He'd pushed this car through every storm, every emergency, and tonight of all nights it had chosen to quit. Caleb let out a whimper, struggling to breathe. Ethan rushed back in, grabbed his son from the back seat, wrapped him in his coat, and scanned the horizon. Darkness everywhere except for a faint, flickering light on the hill. A house. He didn't think. He ran. Mud splashed up his jeans, wind howled in his ears, and the boy in his arms trembled violently against his chest. The light grew clearer with every step, a porch lamp swinging on a long metal chain. A large house, old but not abandoned, stood at the top of the hill like a guardian forgotten by time. He reached the porch, his boots thudding hard against the wood. Rain poured from the eaves, soaking him to the bone. With a trembling hand, he pounded the door. 1 second, 2, 5, nothing. He was about to turn away when the porch light flickered and the door creaked open. She stood there in a navy cardigan and flannel pajama pants, her hair loosely tied damp from what must have been interrupted sleep. A woman in her mid-30s, elegant, even in simplicity. Her eyes met his, and for a long second she didn't speak. Her lips parted. Her hand flew to her chest. Ethan tried to form words. I'm sorry. My son. He's having trouble breathing. My car broke down. I just need a phone. Or help." The woman didn't move. Her eyes were locked on his face as if she were staring at a ghost. Then she whispered, barely audible over the storm, "I've waited since 1998. Ethan blinked. "What?" She looked down, shaken as if the weight of a decade had dropped into her chest. Then, suddenly snapping back into motion, she stepped aside. "Come in. Hurry." He hesitated for a split second, unsure whether she was confused, hallucinating, or both. But Caleb's body jerked in his arms again, and Ethan rushed in. The warmth of the house hit him like a wall. Oak floors soft, lighting the scent of cinnamon and old books. She led him quickly to the couch and grabbed a wool blanket. "Lay him here," she said. Ethan obeyed. The woman disappeared down the hall and returned moments later with a small nebulizer. He stared, wide-eyed. You have this?" She nodded, already fitting the mouthpiece. "I'm a clinical psychologist. My sister has asthma. I keep one in case she visits." Ethan held the mask over Caleb's face while the vapor filled his lungs. The boy's breathing eased slowly but surely. Minutes passed in silence, broken only by the rhythm of the machine and the ticking of a nearby wall clock. When Ethan finally looked up, the woman was sitting on a nearby armchair watching him with a mixture of awe and disbelief. "I don't understand," he said. "What did you mean, you waited since 1998? Her voice was soft. "Do you remember a girl, maybe 10 years old, at a bus stop, alone, in the rain?" The question pierced him like a forgotten echo. He swallowed, hard. I think so." "You gave her your jacket," she continued. "Told her to sit near the streetlight. Said people don't hurt kids who are visible." He nodded slowly, pieces clicking into place. "You had a purple backpack." Tears sprang to her eyes. "I carried it every day. You were crying. Your mom was late. She never came that night." Silence fell again, but it was heavy this time, full of shared history that neither had known they carried until now. "I tried to find you," she said. "I wrote letters, asked around. No one knew your name. You disappeared before the cops arrived. I thought maybe you weren't real." Ethan exhaled. "I ran, back to the shelter before they could take me again." She gave him a look that held something more than gratitude, an ache buried too long. "You saved me. I didn't even know your name." He stared at her, rainwater still dripping from his sleeves. "Ethan." She smiled as if the name itself had finally given her breath. "Claire." And for the first time in years, as the storm howled outside, Ethan felt something unfamiliar rise in his chest, like maybe this wasn't a mistake. Maybe he hadn't knocked on the wrong door at all. The morning came slowly reluctant and gray, with streaks of silver pushing through the thinning clouds. The storm had passed, but it left behind the scent of damp earth and the hush of a town still asleep. Inside the old house on the hill, silence lingered too, but not the kind that felt empty. It was the silence of something held gently between two people who weren't quite strangers anymore, but not yet something else. Claire stood at the kitchen island, her fingers wrapped around a chipped blue mug. Her gaze kept drifting toward the couch in the living room, where Ethan slept upright, his arm protectively draped around his son. Caleb was curled against his side, breathing evenly now, the worst of the episode behind him. She hadn't slept. Not really. Instead, she sat by the window for hours, watching the storm taper off and wondering what strange current of the universe had finally brought that boy, the boy with the fierce eyes and broken shoes from 1998, back to her door. It had been so long enough that everyone said she should let it go, that it was just a childhood fantasy, that maybe she'd imagined him altogether, but she hadn't, and last night proved it. "Coffee." Ethan's voice was low, slightly hoarse as he stepped into the kitchen with Caleb still asleep on the couch. Claire turned surprised. "You're awake." He nodded. His eyes were tired but alert, and guarded. "I didn't mean to fall asleep," he said quickly. "I didn't mean to stay." "It's okay," Claire said, offering a gentle smile. "You stayed because you needed to, and that's allowed here." Ethan looked down as if unsure what to do with kindness spoken so plainly. "I can't pay you back for what you did," he said. "The breathing machine letting us stay." "All of it." "You already did," she replied quietly. "A long time ago." He glanced away, unsettled by how much weight she gave to something he barely remembered. "I was just a kid. I didn't do anything special. You showed up when I thought no one would," she said. "That's more than most grown men have done in my life." They stood there, the hum of the refrigerator and the soft ticking of the wall clock filling the spaces between them. "I kept wondering what your name was," she said after a moment. "All these years, I only had a fuzzy memory of your face, your voice, and I remember you smelled like rain and motor oil." Ethan gave a dry chuckle. "Still do, probably." Claire smiled, but her eyes shimmered with something deeper. "I told myself I would ask your name if I ever saw you again. I just never thought it would be like this." He shifted uncomfortably. "It's strange, hearing that someone was waiting for you when you didn't even know you were worth waiting for." Her heart clenched at that. "Ethan," she said gently, "you were a child, and you were kind to a girl you didn't know. That doesn't just disappear. He gave a tired smile, but it didn't quite reach his eyes. Life didn't exactly turn out the way people hoped for me. Claire paused. What do you mean? He shrugged. Foster care. A few homes, some worse than others. I ran away more than once, spent a lot of nights sleeping in cars or behind gas stations, but I made it through. Barely. There was no bitterness in his voice, only the dull weight of someone who'd carried too much for too long. What about Caleb's mom? Claire asked gently. She left after he turned 2. Ethan replied, his tone unreadable. Said she didn't sign up for all this. I've been raising him on my own ever since. Working nights, whatever jobs I can get. Claire didn't say anything right away. She simply reached for the coffee pot and poured a second cup, setting it gently in front of him. It wasn't sympathy on her face, it was recognition. The quiet understanding of someone who had also walked alone for too long. Ethan took the mug and held it for a moment before sipping. This place. It's yours. My parents owned it. We lived here until I was 12, Claire said. After that night at the bus stop, they pulled me out of school and sent me to stay with relatives in Colorado for a few years. I had panic attacks for months after that. Therapy helped eventually. So much that I became a therapist myself. Ethan raised an eyebrow, surprised. So you help people now? She nodded. I try. Mostly children. Kids who feel lost or broken. Like I did. He looked at her. Really looked at her for the first time that morning. And there was something different in his eyes now. Not just exhaustion or worry, but a sliver of admiration. Maybe even respect. You waited for me all this time, he said softly. Claire shrugged, but her voice betrayed her emotion. Not exactly. I just never forgot. And when I came back to this house, I always thought maybe one day you'd walk by, or knock on the door. Ethan looked down into his coffee, his voice thick. That must have seemed foolish after a while. Maybe she said, a small smile playing on her lips. But I've always believed in unlikely things. I had to, because that night in the rain, someone I didn't know made me feel safe, and that memory saved me more times than I can count. Ethan didn't know what to say to that, but something in him shifted, not all at once, but like the first loosening of a tightly clenched fist. Behind them, Caleb stirred, sitting up with a soft groan. Claire smiled and walked over, kneeling beside him with easy familiarity. Good morning, sleepyhead, she said. The boy blinked, then looked around. Where are we? In a safe place, Ethan replied. Caleb smiled faintly, then leaned back against the couch. Claire turned to Ethan. You don't have to leave right away, you know. You both can stay a little longer. Rest. Get warm. Think. He opened his mouth to protest, but she raised a hand. No pressure, no strings. Just, let this be the place where something good begins again. Ethan said nothing, but he nodded, and for now that was enough. By mid-morning, the rain had stopped completely. A thin veil of fog drifted lazily across the treetops as the mountain town stirred awake. The window panes of Claire's house glowed amber with soft light, casting a sense of fragile warmth that didn't quite reach Ethan's bones. He stood alone in the front room, staring out at the gravel driveway where his broken-down car sat like a stranded memory. Claire had offered to call a local mechanic, but he'd declined more out of pride than practicality. Pride, he knew, had cost him more than it had ever protected him. Still, some habits clung tighter than scars. Behind him, Caleb's laughter floated from the kitchen. Claire had convinced the boy to try her pancakes banana and cinnamon with a drizzle of honey. Ethan hadn't seen his son that animated in weeks. And yet, he couldn't relax. He kept waiting for something to go wrong. A knock on the door. A word said wrong. A moment too vulnerable. He was used to life offering glimpses of kindness only to pull them away when he reached for them. Can I show you something? Claire's voice broke his thoughts. She stood by the hallway, arms folded gently in front of her eyes, steady. He hesitated. Sure. She led him past the kitchen and down a narrow corridor to a room tucked behind a sliding barn door. The hinges groaned faintly as she opened it. Inside, soft light filtered through gauzy curtains. The room smelled faintly of cedarwood and something floral lavender, maybe. Ethan froze at the threshold. The walls were covered in drawings, dozens of them. Some framed, some pinned with care, some curling at the edges. A swirl of charcoal sketches, watercolors, pencil outlines, every one of them depicting a different scene from that rainy night at the bus stop. A little girl huddled beneath a flickering streetlight. A boy offering his coat, raindrops splattered across his shoulders. Two silhouettes sitting on a bench, heads bent close. A crumpled purple backpack on the ground. "You drew these?" Ethan asked, voice low. Claire nodded. "Not all at once. Over years. Every time I had a memory, a feeling, something that wouldn't let me sleep. I'd sketch it. Some were from therapy exercises, others just for me." He stepped inside, slowly, overwhelmed. It was like walking into someone else's heart. "Most people don't believe one memory can shape a life," she said quietly. But that night, it changed how I saw the world. I wasn't just scared of strangers anymore. I was looking for someone who proved that even in the worst moments, good existed. Ethan stared at the drawings, awed and humbled. "I don't know if I deserve all this." Claire turned to him. "It's not about deserving. It's about the mark we leave, whether we realize it or not." He rubbed the back of his neck. "I think I wanted to believe that night never mattered, because remembering meant remembering everything else too." Claire waited, letting the silence speak for itself. "I've done things I'm not proud of," he admitted. "When you grow up in the system, it gets in your blood. I lied to survive. I stole food. I fought people. I got arrested once for vandalizing a foster home window just to get out. They moved me again and again." His voice tightened. "But I never stopped trying to be better for Caleb. He's all I've got." Claire's gaze softened. "He's lucky to have you." He shook his head. "I've slept in shelters. I've worked jobs no one wanted. I've walked 10 miles just to get him to a free clinic. I'm not proud of my life, Claire. I'm just tired of feeling like I'm always one bad break away from failing him." She stepped closer, her voice steady but tender. "Maybe you're not failing at all. Maybe the fact that you're still standing, still showing up for him every day is the very definition of not failing." He swallowed, caught off guard by the sincerity in her words, by the way she looked at him, not with pity, but with belief. "I don't know how to let people in," he confessed. "I'm not good at being seen." Claire gave a faint, knowing smile. "Then maybe you just need someone who won't look away." Something in Ethan's chest ached like a locked door he didn't know was still shut. She turned to a small bookshelf near the window and pulled down an old photo album. Inside were newspaper clippings, notes, and a worn envelope sealed with tape. "I never told anyone about that night except my therapist," she said. "But after I got better, I started writing letters to you." Ethan looked up, startled. To me, Claire nodded. "Of course I never sent them. I didn't know who you were, but it helped me understand things. Helped me forgive my mother for never showing up. Helped me realize that not all love looks like family, and not all family needs to be blood." She handed him the envelope. "You can read them, or not. Just know they're here." He took it slowly, almost reverently. The weight of it in his hands felt heavier than paper. "Why me?" he asked. "You could have moved on. Forgotten me. Why wait for someone who didn't even know he mattered?" Claire looked at him, then her voice like sunlight breaking through fog. "Because kindness, when it's real, plants seeds. And I knew someday you'd come back to see what grew." Ethan didn't reply, but for the first time in a long time he felt something rise in his chest that wasn't fear or shame. It was the unfamiliar warmth of being remembered, of being worth remembering. And that changed everything. Ethan had never lingered anywhere this long before. He stood at the edge of Claire's front porch that afternoon, watching the mist rise off the hills as the sun burned slowly through what remained of the morning fog. The house behind him creaked gently in the wind, its age singing a low lullaby across the floorboards. He could hear Caleb's muffled laughter through the screen door. Claire had brought out an old board game, something about mice and cheese. Somehow, his son was laughing, genuinely laughing. Ethan hadn't heard that sound in months. His eyes traced the roofline of the house, the peeling white trim, the weathered swing that swayed on its own. The place had character. It had memory. Claire stepped beside him with 2 mugs of warm cider, handing him one without a word. She didn't ask what he was thinking. She seemed to know better than that. Instead, she sipped her drink and let the silence wrap around them like an old quilt. "You ever think about leaving this place?" Ethan finally asked, his voice quiet. Claire smiled faintly, still looking out over the hills. "All the time. Then I remember why I came back." He glanced at her, waiting. "This house," she said softly, "used to feel enormous. When I was a kid, it was my whole world. The porch was a castle tower, the attic a dragon's cave. But after that night, after the bus stop, everything changed." She paused. "I didn't feel safe in the world anymore. Not even here." Ethan nodded, understanding more than he wanted to admit. "My parents didn't know how to handle it," she continued. "They did what they thought was best, shipped me off to family in Colorado. It was years before I came back. And when I did, they were gone. Sold the city house, left me this one. I almost didn't take it." "But you did," Ethan said. Claire looked at him then, because a part of me hoped maybe if I returned to where I was broken, something might finally heal. Her words hung in the air between them. Unforced, unapologetic. Ethan turned the mug in his hands. "That's a brave thing to do." "It didn't feel brave," she said. "Just necessary." He stared out at the tree line. Most people would have just tried to forget. "I tried," that she replied. "Didn't work." He gave a small nod. "I know the feeling." Claire leaned back against the porch rail. "And you? Do you ever think about leaving wherever you are?" Ethan let out a soft huff of laughter. "All the time. But I don't have anywhere to go. We've bounced from place to place for years. Whenever I think we found a spot to settle, something gives, rent goes up, jobs dry up, the car breaks down. I got used to not unpacking. That sounds exhausting." He shrugged. "It is. But you stop noticing after a while. Just put your head down and keep moving." Claire looked at him with quiet conviction. "Maybe it's time you had somewhere to stay still." He didn't answer right away. Instead, he watched a squirrel dart across the edge of the porch railing, tail flicking like a metronome. "You know what the hardest part is," he said after a while. Claire shook her head. "Not knowing if you're doing enough. Not knowing if your kid's going to remember the nights you made it work or just the times you failed." Her voice softened. "Caleb's not going to remember what you couldn't give him. He's going to remember that you never left." Ethan swallowed. "I hope so." They both fell quiet, letting the wind speak for a while. After a moment, Claire turned to face him fully. "You know, people in town think I'm strange." He raised an eyebrow. "Why?" "Because I moved back to an old house on a hill, live alone. Barely go to church, don't date much, and spend my time drawing pictures of memories that no one else remembers." Ethan chuckled despite himself. "Well, when you put it like that," they whisper, "especially the older neighbors, think I'm some kind of ghost. You don't seem like a ghost to me." "No," she asked, eyes twinkling. "What do I seem like?" He hesitated, then said with rare honesty, "Like someone who knows how to stay." "That's rarer than you think." Claire's expression shifted, just slightly, but enough to make his chest tighten. The porch light flicked on as the late afternoon turned slowly toward dusk. "I meant what I said earlier," she told him. "You don't have to leave right away. You can stay until the car's fixed. Or longer." Ethan stared into his cider, tension prickling under his skin. "I don't want to be anyone's burden, Claire. You're not." Her voice was firm, unwavering. "Not to me. Not to this house. You're just someone who finally came home." His heart pulled sharply at that. He wanted to believe it. He wanted to lean into that idea to let his son rest in a bed more than one night to stop listening for eviction knocks or car engines dying. But he wasn't sure he knew how to live without running. The screen door creaked open. Caleb stood in the doorway holding the game board. "Dad, she let me win," he said with an exaggerated frown. "Again." Claire laughed. "Not true. You beat me fair and square." "Barely," Caleb muttered. Ethan smiled, reaching out to ruffle his son's hair. "Go wash up, champ. We'll figure out dinner soon." As the boy disappeared again inside, Ethan set his mug down on the porch rail. "I don't know what this is," he said slowly. "This place, this feeling. But it's been a long time since anything felt—" "Okay." Claire nodded. "Then let's just call it a beginning." He looked at her, then the woman who'd waited since 1998, not with desperation but with quiet strength. And something inside him, something long dormant and bruised, whispered that maybe beginnings weren't just for other people anymore. Maybe, just maybe they were for him too. The sun dipped low behind the pines, casting long amber streaks across the hardwood floor. Inside the quiet of Claire's living room, the day softened into hush. Caleb had fallen asleep on the couch again, a half-read comic book draped over his chest. His small frame rose and fell with rhythmic certainty, a sound Ethan had learned to check for like a heartbeat outside his own. Claire returned from the kitchen carrying a folded blanket. She draped it gently over Caleb, her hands moving with the careful grace of someone who didn't want to wake a sleeping hope. "He trusts you," Ethan said from the doorway, his voice quieter than usual. Claire turned, startled for a moment. "I didn't mean to overstep." "No," he said. "It's not that. It's just, he doesn't relax around people easily. Not even his teachers. He always looks like he's ready to pack up and leave." She gave a small smile. "He gets that from you." Ethan leaned against the doorframe, arms crossed. He looked at his son, then down at the floor. "I didn't grow up knowing what trust looked like," he admitted. "By the time I hit 10, I'd learned how to make myself invisible. Smile when you need something. Don't get too comfortable. Don't ask questions. Keep your bag ready." Claire sat on the edge of the couch, her eyes fixed gently on him. "You were just a child." He nodded. A child with a file and no address. She waited, sensing there was more. "I remember one home," he continued slowly. "They kept the fridge locked at night. Said it was to teach us discipline, but really they were just cheap. I'd sneak down and eat dry cereal out of my hand in the dark. And one night I got caught." Claire frowned. "What did they do?" "They made me sit outside. Middle of winter. No coat. Said maybe I'd remember next time." Her hands clenched in her lap. That same week, Ethan said they took in a new kid 6 years old. He cried every night for his mom. They gave him sleeping pills so he'd shut up. I watched it all and thought, if you ever want to get out of here, don't be soft. Don't be like him. Claire looked at him with something that wasn't pity, it was fury. Quiet and raw and entirely on his behalf. No child should be taught that kind of lesson. Ethan nodded slowly. But that's what I carried into manhood. How not to need. How not to feel. I built a life around keeping it all locked down. He looked at her, then really looked like someone testing light after too long in the dark. Until that night. With you. Claire's breath caught. "You don't know this," he said. Voice rough, but after I left you at the bus stop, I walked 3 miles in the rain to get back to the shelter. My feet were soaked. I was freezing. But I had this strange feeling like I'd done something right. Just once. He smiled, but there was pain behind it. I got beaten for sneaking out. They took my jacket. Said if I ever ran again, they'd make sure I ended up in juvie. Claire's eyes filled, and she rose without hesitation. She walked to the old bookshelf near the piano, pulled open the bottom drawer, and returned with a small plastic bag. Inside was a child's denim jacket, worn, torn at the sleeve, and unmistakably familiar. Ethan stared at it stunned. "I kept it," she said. "All these years." "I thought they took it," he murmured, barely touching the fabric. "They tried. But I told the officers it belonged to me, that it was a gift. I lied. I never lied as a kid, but that day, I had to." Ethan laughed softly, the sound edged with disbelief. "So you stole my jacket." "I borrowed it forever," Claire corrected with a smile. "I couldn't explain why I needed to keep it. I just knew that it meant something, that you meant something." He took the jacket from the bag and sat beside Caleb, running his hand over the fabric. The years had faded its color, but the memory inside it remained intact. Claire sat next to him. "You said something to me that night," she said. "Do you remember?" Ethan shook his head. "You told me, 'Don't cry. People see tears and think they can hurt you more.'" He winced. "That sounds like something I'd say back then. But you also said, 'But I see you, and I won't let anyone hurt you tonight.'" He looked down. "I didn't think I meant anything to anyone back then. I didn't think I had anything to offer. But that night, I wanted to be someone, even if just for a few minutes." Claire reached for his hand, resting hers lightly on top. "You were someone," she whispered. "You were the first person who ever showed me that kindness wasn't something I had to earn." Ethan didn't speak. He couldn't. His throat was tight, his chest heavier than he could bear. Then Caleb stirred, shifting under the blanket, mumbling in his sleep. Ethan pulled the jacket into his lap, blinking back something unspeakable. Claire watched them both, and her heart swelled with a mix of hope and awe. This wasn't just about remembering the boy he used to be. This was about reminding him of who he still was and who he could become. "You don't have to run anymore," she said softly. Ethan turned to her, his voice trembling. "I don't know how to stay." Claire's answer was steady. "Then learn. Here, one day at a time." And in the stillness of that room, with his son breathing steady beside him and the weight of an old jacket in his lap, Ethan felt something he hadn't felt in years, the beginning of home. The morning after sunlight spilled through the kitchen window in long golden stripes, warming the tile floor. Ethan sat at the table sipping black coffee while Caleb crunched cereal, nearby, legs swinging beneath the chair. It felt domestic, almost foreign in its normalcy. Claire moved about the kitchen with a quiet ease, cracking eggs into a bowl, humming a soft melody under her breath. She wore an old sweatshirt and jeans, her hair tied back casually, but to Ethan she looked like something sacred, like safety wrapped in skin. And it terrified him. He shouldn't be here. He knew it in his bones, the way a man knows a house isn't his no matter how kind the host is. This, whatever this was, wasn't real life. It was a pause, a kindness extended. But kindness always had a limit, and Ethan had a history of overstaying welcomes. Claire slid a plate in front of Caleb and offered Ethan a second cup of coffee without asking. He murmured thanks, but didn't meet her eyes. "Carson's Auto said they'll tow your car this afternoon," she said gently. "They're a bit backed up, but they'll give it a look tomorrow." Ethan nodded. "Thanks." "You're welcome to stay until it's sorted," she added. He didn't respond. She noticed the change in his posture, the shoulders drawing inward, the cup held too tightly. "You okay?" she asked. "I should go," he said. His voice was quiet but final. Claire blinked. "Go where doesn't matter. Just, we've been here too long. I appreciate everything, but I don't want to cause any trouble." She stepped closer. "You're not causing trouble, Ethan. You're just breathing." "That's the problem," he said, standing abruptly. "I'm breathing under someone else's roof, eating someone else's food. I shouldn't be here." Caleb looked up, confusion in his eyes. Dad Ethan softened. "Finish your breakfast, buddy. We'll talk in a bit." But Claire didn't let it drop. She moved in front of him, blocking the doorway. "You're scared," she said. He met her gaze, eyes tight. "You think I don't have reason to be?" "I didn't say that," she replied, calm but firm. "But running now. That's not strength, Ethan. That's habit." He bristled. "You don't know what it's like living on edge every day. Worrying the next knock is bad news. Always calculating what you can afford to lose." "I don't," she agreed. "But I know what it's like to live afraid. I know what it's like to expect everything good to vanish." Her voice softened. "That's what trauma does. It teaches us to abandon joy before it abandons us." He closed his eyes, jaw clenched. He hated how much her words got in, how they settled in his chest like truth. "I can't need you," he whispered, "because if I need you, and you leave—" Claire reached out gently, placing a hand on his arm. "I'm not leaving." Ethan pulled away. "You say that now. But life always finds a way to take people like you away from people like me. Maybe life's trying to give you something this time." He stared at her, torn between believing and bolting. Then Caleb's small voice broke the tension. "Do I have to leave my new school again?" They turned. Ethan's chest caved at the question. "What, I like it here," Caleb said quietly. "It's the first school where they let me finish my drawings instead of taking them away. Miss Jensen said my sketch of the lighthouse was impressive. No one's ever said that before." Claire knelt beside him, smiling gently. It was impressive. Ethan looked away, his throat tight. He had never been able to give his son anything consistent. No address, no holidays in the same city, no friends whose names stayed past summer. And now, when Caleb was finally smiling, finally sleeping through the night without waking in fear, he was going to rip that away, because he was afraid Claire stood and faced him again. "Let me show you something." She walked to the hall closet and returned with a box. Inside were ropes of all sizes, climbing cords, utility rope, even a thick sailing line. "When I was in therapy, she began, my counselor asked me to write down every fear I had on a different piece of rope. I didn't understand it at first, but she said fear was like a knot. The only way to undo it is to look at it closely, one loop at a time." She pulled out a short cord tied in a messy knot. "This one says, 'People always leave.' I tied it when I was 14. Ethan stared at it. "And this one," she said, holding a longer rope, says, 'I don't deserve peace.' I carried that one into my 20s. She handed it to him. I kept them. She said not to hold on to the fear, but to remember what I've untied, what I've overcome." Ethan didn't know what to say, but his hands closed around the rope as if anchoring himself. "You're allowed to stay," she whispered. "Not because you've earned it, not because you paid for it, but because you're human, and humans deserve rest." The words landed deep, like water finding cracks in dry soil. Claire stepped back, giving him space. Ethan looked at his son, at the knot in his hand, at the sunlight dancing on the floor like a welcome home. Then he sank slowly into the chair beside Caleb and exhaled. A long, unguarded breath. "I'm tired," he admitted. "I know," Claire replied, "but I don't want to teach him that running is the only answer." Ethan said, his voice rough. "I want him to grow roots, not calluses." Claire smiled, eyes full. "Then stay, just long enough to let something grow." And for the first time in years, Ethan didn't feel like a man hanging on by a thread. He felt, however uncertain, like maybe there was a rope he could learn to climb, one that led not away, but home. It had been a quiet week in the house on the hill, the kind of quiet that didn't feel empty, but earned. Each morning, Ethan helped Claire patch things around the property, tightening hinges, fixing a broken gutter, sanding down a loose railing. He was good with his hands, and she never made him feel like he owed her. She just handed him the toolbox, made coffee, and let him breathe. Caleb had started at the nearby public school, and to Ethan's surprise, the boy came home with a smile most days. He talked about a girl named Ella who liked space rockets and a teacher who let him stay in at recess to draw. He seemed lighter, rooted, but if Ethan had learned anything about peace, it was this: it never lasted. It started with a voicemail. He'd walked into the gas station convenience store for a few things and came back to find a missed call from the mechanic. He hit play. "Hey, Ethan, it's Dave, over at Carson's. Just wanted to let you know we looked at your car. The radiator's cracked and the suspension's pretty shot too. Not worth fixing, man. Sorry." His stomach sank. The car was his last asset, his only means of independence. Without it, he felt exposed, dependent, trapped. He tried not to spiral, but old instincts kicked in fast. That night, he barely ate dinner. Claire noticed but didn't press. Instead, she let him sit with his thoughts while she washed dishes and Caleb did homework at the kitchen table. Later, when the boy had gone to bed, she joined Ethan on the porch. The sky was crisp stars puncturing the dark like tiny promises. "You're pulling away," she said gently. "I don't want to talk about it," he replied. She nodded. "Okay, but I'm here when you do." The next day, Ethan drove Claire's old truck into town to apply for a job. It was a small warehouse, a shipping company that moved farm supplies to local counties. He'd done this kind of work before. It was hard honest, and he could disappear into it. He filled out the paper application, handed it to the manager, and waited. The man, a burly guy in his 60s with sunspots on his hands, read over Ethan's form. Then came the question. "You ever been arrested?" Ethan paused. "Yes. When I was 17. Vandalism and resisting." The man's expression flattened. "That, a felony, no sir. Juvenile record. Never reoffended." The manager gave a slow sigh. "We'll let you know." Ethan knew what that meant. 2 hours later, as he walked through the local supermarket with a few groceries, Caleb at his side, it happened. Caleb dropped a carton of milk and it splattered across the tile. Ethan bent to clean it, instinctively reaching for a paper towel from a nearby display when Caleb suddenly coughed hard and dropped to one knee, struggling for air. Panic flared. Ethan scooped him up, trying to calm him, but the wheezing had begun. He rushed to the pharmacy counter, heart pounding. "Excuse me. My son has asthma. He's having trouble breathing. I need his inhaler prescription refilled." The clerk blinked. "Do you have insurance?" "No, but I can pay cash. Just give me I need to check with the pharmacist." And then someone behind him said, "Should he even be raising a kid if he can't afford medicine?" Ethan turned. A woman, mid-50s cardigan and judgment in equal measure, stood beside a man filming the scene with his phone. The man said, "This'll go viral. Deadbeat dad can't save his kid in Walmart." Ethan's face burned. "Turn that off." "Public space," the man said smugly. "Freedom of speech." Claire arrived minutes later, out of breath, hair windblown and eyes blazing. She'd seen the video circulating online someone had tagged the local neighborhood group. She pushed through the crowd like a force of nature. "That's enough," she snapped. "Anyone filming a sick child should be ashamed of themselves." To the woman, "And you, what have you done today that made a child feel safe?" Then she turned to Ethan, placing a hand on his back. "Come on, let's get him to urgent care." She didn't ask questions. She didn't lecture. She just drove. That night, Ethan sat on the back porch alone. The moon was half full, casting pale light across the lawn. He felt hollow. Not angry, just used up. Claire stepped outside, a blanket draped over her shoulders. She sat beside him, but said nothing for a long time. Finally, he whispered, "I shouldn't have brought him into that life. He deserves better." Claire looked at him. "Ethan, you didn't bring him into pain. You shield him from it every day. What he deserves is exactly what you've given him: love, sacrifice, safety. I couldn't even protect him from a cough in a grocery store." "You didn't fail him," she said. "The world failed you, but you're still standing. You're still showing up. And that's what matters." He shook his head. "I hate being seen like that. Like I'm less than. Like I'm some walking mistake." "You're not," she said. "You're the boy who gave away his coat. You're the man who carries his son through fire. Don't let a stranger with a phone define you." He looked at her, then his eyes tired but clearer. "Why do you keep fighting for me?" Claire smiled softly. "Because someone once told me, 'I see you. I won't let anyone hurt you tonight.'" And that was enough. Ethan looked toward the horizon, the sky slowly brightening at the edges. Maybe the fall had come. But perhaps, just perhaps, it meant a rise was coming too. Rain tapped gently on the windows again, softer this time, almost like an echo of that fateful night weeks ago when Ethan had first knocked on Claire's door. The storm now was gentler, less violent, as if the sky had finally decided to forgive something too. Ethan stood at the threshold of the attic room Claire had never shown anyone until tonight. "You sure about this?" he asked. She nodded, barefoot, sweater sleeves pushed up. "It's time." The old door creaked as it opened, revealing a space unlike the rest of the house. The walls were painted a muted, calming blue. A worn writing desk sat by the window, flanked by two mismatched bookshelves overflowing with journals, sketch pads, folded letters bundled in twine. Claire stepped in first, her presence grounding the space. She gestured toward the wall behind the desk, lined from floor to ceiling with envelopes of different sizes, paper yellowing at the edges with age. "These," she said softly, "are all letters I wrote to you." Ethan didn't speak. "Some are from when I was a teenager, others from college, some just last year. I never knew if I'd see you again, but I kept writing. It helped me understand myself, and helped me hold on to the version of you that saved me." She picked one off the shelf and opened it carefully, reading aloud. "Dear you, I saw a boy on the street today who reminded me of you. He had that same stubborn look. It made me wonder where you are now. I hope someone's looking at you with kindness. I hope you found somewhere to call home. See." Ethan stared at the page, stunned into silence. Claire placed the letter back, then faced him. "You weren't just a moment in my life, Ethan. You were the proof I needed that not all people leave, that kindness doesn't always demand something in return." He looked down at his hands. "You don't know who I became after that night. I've made a mess of things more times than I can count. I've failed, broken promises, broken myself." Claire stepped closer. "And yet, here you are, raising a boy with more gentleness than most men are taught to carry, fixing things with your hands when your heart's still healing. You haven't failed, Ethan. You've fought every day not to become the darkness that tried to shape you." Her voice caught. "And that matters." He slowly approached the shelf, tracing one of the bundles with his fingers. "So, this is what I meant to you." She smiled. "No, this is what you helped me become." They sat side by side on the old rug knees, nearly touching the soft patter of rain above them like a lullaby. Claire opened a faded green journal and handed it to him. "You should read this one," she said. It was the first. Inside was a drawing, two silhouettes on a bench under a streetlight. Her younger self had scrawled a caption. "He gave me warmth when the world didn't." Ethan's breath caught. He turned the page. The entry was shaky in a 12-year-old's handwriting. "I hope he knows I didn't forget. I hope he knows he didn't disappear." He looked up. Claire's eyes shimmered but didn't spill. She wasn't trying to make him cry. She was trying to let him feel. "I didn't think anyone ever saw me," he whispered. "I did," she replied. "Even when you were gone." He closed the book gently. "You've spent all these years remembering someone you barely knew." "No," she corrected. "I spent all these years remembering the truth that someone like you existed. Because if even one stranger could show me kindness without expecting anything, then maybe the world wasn't as cruel as it had seemed." There was silence again, but this time it was warm, healing. "I kept trying to become someone who could repay that moment," she said. "That's why I studied psychology. That's why I came back to this house. I wanted to be someone's safe place because once a boy with holes in his shoes was mine." Ethan lowered his head, his voice ragged. "You were the only person who waited for me. I didn't know I was waiting for you," she said, her voice tender. "I just never closed the door. He looked around the room, the walls holding decades of unsent words, and something inside him finally broke open. Not in a dramatic collapse, but in a quiet surrender. "I don't have the right words," he said, voice shaking. "Not to repay you. Not for this." Claire reached across the space and took his hand. "It's not about repayment. You don't owe me anything." "Yes, I do," he said. "You gave me a place I didn't believe existed, a version of myself I thought I lost." She smiled through the emotion. "Then take it. Keep it. Live it." He nodded slowly, his fingers tightening around hers. "I will." Later that night, long after the attic light had dimmed, Ethan sat alone at the writing desk. Claire had gone downstairs to check on Caleb. The rain had stopped. He pulled a blank sheet of paper from the drawer, and for the first time in years he picked up a pen. He didn't write to Claire. He wrote to the boy he used to be. You were never invisible. You mattered, even when no one said it. Someone remembered you, and that saved your life. He folded the letter and tucked it into an envelope. On the front he wrote, "To the one who stayed through the storm." Then, gently, he slid it into the shelf beside Claire's. And just like that, the room of letters became a room of beginnings. The late October air had grown crisp, curling into the corners of the old house with a kind of gentle urgency. Leaves rustled against the porch like old letters being read aloud by the wind. Inside, the kettle whistled softly, the scent of chamomile steeping in the small kitchen. Everything felt quiet still, yet underneath it all, something new stirred. Ethan sat at the breakfast table, hands wrapped around his mug, eyes distant. Across from him, Claire watched in silence, reading more in his stillness than words would have offered. "You've been different since the attic," she said gently. Ethan glanced up. "Yeah, something shifted. Good or bad?" He hesitated. "Both." Claire waited, knowing better than to press. "I've never let anyone see that part of me before," he said. "The part that remembers, the part that wants something more than just getting by." Claire nodded. "It's hard letting the guard down. It's terrifying." They sat in shared quiet for a moment, the low clink of Caleb's pencil on the other side of the room blending into the hum of the day. Claire reached into a folder by her side and slid a paper across the table. It was a flyer, simple black and white. At the top it read, "Volunteer maintenance needed. Community Resource Center. They're renovating the rec building downtown," she explained. "They need someone who knows tools, can patch, drywall, repair old lighting. It's not paid yet, but it could lead to something." Ethan stared at it. "I don't want charity." "This isn't charity," Claire said. "It's dignity. Purpose. A start." He looked away. "I've had starts before. They don't last. Maybe this one does," she replied. "But you won't know if you don't try." He picked up the flyer, folding it slowly. "I'm scared, Claire," he admitted. "Scared that if I let myself believe in this place in you, in me, I'll fail. And worse, I'll let Caleb down again." Claire's voice was soft but sure. "Let me offer you something." He looked at her warily. "Stay," she said. "Not just until the car's fixed. Stay because this house isn't just mine anymore. It became something else the moment you walked back into it." Ethan stared at her, frozen. "Live here," she continued, "at least for a while. Help at the center. Let Caleb finish school without packing a bag every 3 weeks. Let yourself breathe." He was shaking his head before she finished. "Claire, I can't. What would people say? What does it look like? A man showing up at your door in the middle of the night, then staying. You've got a reputation." She smiled gently. "I care more about my life than my reputation. And this us, it feels like life." He pushed back his chair, pacing toward the window, gripping the sill as if to anchor himself. "I've never been someone people wanted to stay," he said. "That's not true." He turned to face her, eyes raw. "What if I don't know how to be enough?" Claire stood and walked slowly toward him. She didn't touch him, didn't crowd his space, just stood near enough that he felt her steadiness. "You don't have to be enough," she said. "You just have to be here. Show up. One day at a time. That's more than most." Caleb peeked around the corner. Dad Ethan turned. "Miss Claire said I can help her plant bulbs tomorrow in the garden," the boy said. "Is that okay?" Ethan's throat tightened. "Yeah, buddy, that's okay." The boy beamed and ducked back to his drawing. Claire smiled softly. "He's already putting down roots." Ethan exhaled slowly. "I don't know if I can promise forever." "I'm not asking for forever," Claire said. "I'm offering today, and we'll figure out the rest." He studied her face the way it held both tenderness and grit, the way she didn't offer rescue but partnership. Something inside him cracked open, and this time he didn't resist it. "Okay," he said finally. "One day at a time." That evening the house hummed with a different energy. Ethan stood in the garage rummaging through Claire's old toolbox prepping supplies for the community center. He found his hands steadier than usual, his chest less tight. Claire came out holding a stack of folded laundry. "I cleared the guest room closet. There's space for your things." Ethan glanced up. "I don't have much." "You've got more than you think," she said. He nodded. She paused. "You okay?" He wiped his hands on a rag. "Yeah. Actually, yeah." Claire started to turn, but he stopped her with a quiet, "Claire." She faced him. He looked at her eyes, unreadable. "If you hadn't opened that door, I don't know where I'd be." She stepped closer. "And if you hadn't knocked, I'd still be waiting." They stood there in the faint light of the garage between the past that shaped them and the future they were slowly, bravely choosing. No promises, just presence. And that was enough. The morning light spilled across the floorboards of the community center like spilled paint, golden warm, full of promise. The once abandoned building now buzzed softly with the hum of tools and voices, the rhythm of restoration. Ethan stood near a freshly painted wall caulking a window frame with steady hands. He wore an old gray shirt smudged with dust, his sleeves rolled up his brow damp with honest sweat. It had been weeks since he'd moved into Claire's home. Weeks of stillness and routine of laughter echoing through a kitchen that had never been his but no longer felt like it belonged to someone else. And now, here he was building something, not just fixing it. "Hey, window guy," called a voice from behind. "You're making the rest of us look bad." Ethan turned to see Rick, a retired firefighter who'd taken a liking to him. The older man grinned, balancing a box of electrical supplies on his hip. Ethan chuckled. "I aim to please." "You aim too well," Rick said. "You sure you never did contracting before?" "Nope. Just survival." Rick didn't laugh, but he nodded with understanding. "You ever need steady work, I've got a cousin runs a renovation crew. You've got a good eye, and better work ethic than half the guys I've hired." Ethan blinked, surprised. "I appreciate that. Don't thank me yet. Wait until you see the paychecks." "They ain't magic." Rick winked, then wandered off. Ethan turned back to the window, but something in him had shifted. This wasn't just a task. It was a possibility. Later that day, Claire arrived with a tray of baked goods, and Caleb trailing behind her holding a paper cup of lemonade like it was gold. "You should see the bulletin board," Caleb said wide-eyed. "There's a picture of Dad on it." Ethan raised an eyebrow. "What?" Claire laughed. "Someone from the town council took a photo last week, said they were highlighting volunteers. Your son's very proud." "I'm not posing for anything," Ethan muttered. "You didn't. You were holding a ladder and frowning," Claire replied. "It's very on brand." Ethan chuckled, but it softened into something deeper. "Thank you. For this. For everything." Claire placed the tray on a table, then looked at him steadily. "You're doing this. You. I just opened a door." He lowered his voice. That was more than enough. By afternoon, the building buzzed louder than before. Word had spread about Ethan, about the single dad who showed up day after day, worked without complaint, stayed late to fix what others missed. People came by just to say thank you. A few dropped off tools they no longer used. One man handed him a fresh pair of work gloves, shrugging awkwardly as he muttered, "Figured you could use 'em." Ethan nodded speechless. He wasn't used to being seen like this, not as a burden, but as part of something. That evening, the three of them walked home together. The sky blazed orange and pink, the last light folding over the hills like a warm blanket. Caleb raced ahead, laughing, chasing his shadow. Claire and Ethan followed quietly, their steps naturally falling in sync. "He told his teacher today that his dad builds places where people get better," Claire said softly. Ethan looked at her, emotion flickering in his chest. "I never thought I'd be anyone's hero." "You don't have to be a hero," she replied. "You just have to be his, and you already are." They reached the house as the first stars blinked into view. Claire turned toward the garden, her hands brushing through the tops of the marigolds she and Caleb had planted days before. "I was thinking," she began, then paused, "about writing that article again. The one you told me about Ethan asked. The story of the boy who gave you his jacket." She nodded. "But now, it's not just about that night. It's about what happened after. About what kindness can grow into if someone gives it room." Ethan hesitated. "You think people want to read that?" "I think people need to," she said. He nodded quietly, honored. She turned toward him. "Would you mind if I included your name?" He thought about it. The old version of himself, the one who avoided notice, who didn't want to exist on paper, shrank a little in the shadow of who he was becoming. "No," he said, "I think it's time." A week later, the article went live. Claire titled it, "The Boy with the Jacket and the Man Who Stayed." It was simple, honest, no embellishments, just truth. And it spread. People wrote letters, strangers sent emails. A teacher in Wisconsin shared it with her class. A pastor in Idaho read it during a sermon on grace. A man in Florida donated to the community center in Ethan's name, signing the note for the kids who were still waiting at the bus stop. Ethan read every message in disbelief. "Why me?" he asked Claire one night. "I didn't do anything that special." "You did something kind," she answered. "And kindness, Ethan, is more powerful than we let ourselves believe." On a quiet Sunday morning, Ethan took Caleb to the park. They sat on a bench near the playground, the same kind of bench where a scared, soaked girl had once waited for a mother who never came. Caleb leaned against his side, warm and content. "Dad." "Yeah, are we gonna stay here? For real?" Ethan looked out over the trees, then down at his son's hopeful eyes. "Yeah, buddy, I think we are." Caleb grinned and ran off toward the monkey bars. And Ethan sat back, arms draped along the bench, his heart full with something he hadn't known in years. He wasn't just surviving anymore. He was living. And the good he'd carried even when the world tried to beat it out of him had finally come full circle into a life he was proud to call his own. Winter came early that year. The trees, once rich with the golds and coppers of October, now stood bare and silvered with frost. The garden behind Claire's house had gone quiet, resting beneath a blanket of soft earth. Even the air had changed, cooler, stiller, as if the whole town were holding its breath in gratitude. Inside the house, the warmth told a different story. Ethan stood in the kitchen wearing a flannel shirt that Claire insisted made him look dangerously domestic, flipping pancakes on the griddle. Caleb sat at the table, scribbling in a sketchbook, the corners of his mouth tugged upward in concentration. Claire leaned against the counter, sipping coffee, watching them both with that quiet glow in her eyes, the kind you don't fake, the kind that only grows where healing has happened. They didn't talk about timelines anymore. They didn't count days since he arrived or how long he'd stay. Somewhere along the way, the edges of temporary had blurred into home. "Okay," Ethan said, sliding a pancake onto Caleb's plate. One spaceship with syrup coming in for landing. Caleb grinned. "Permission to eat, Captain granted." Claire laughed, her heart full. These moments, ordinary and unremarkable by most standards, were the very definition of extraordinary to her. They were the moments she had once only imagined from behind closed doors and unsent letters. Later that morning, the three of them bundled up and drove into town. The newly renovated community center was hosting its grand reopening just in time for the holidays. Lights twinkled on every railing and children's laughter rang out from the playground Ethan had helped repair. But the real surprise waited inside. At the far end of the hall, a small brass plaque had been mounted to the wall. Claire nudged Ethan gently toward it. He read it twice before speaking. The address in her prayer. In honor of those who choose kindness and those who choose to stay. Beneath it, a photograph grainy but unmistakable of a boy in a too-big jacket sheltering a girl under a streetlight. Next to it, a new picture Ethan and Caleb arms around each other standing in front of the restored center. Not posed, not perfect, but real. Ethan blinked hard. You did this. Claire shook her head. We did this. People passed by, pausing to smile, to nod, to whisper things like, that's the man from the story, or he's the one who helped rebuild this place. But Ethan didn't hear most of it. His gaze was locked on the plaque, on the words, on the truth that he'd become someone his son could be proud of, someone he could be proud of. That night back home, Claire lit the first candle of the season. They had no formal tradition, yet no religious rituals or inherited customs. Just warmth, togetherness, the miracle of being where they were with who they were. Ethan stepped out to the garage for a moment and returned holding something wrapped in old newspaper. Claire looked up, curious. I found this in the attic, he said, placing it gently in her hands. She unwrapped it slowly. It was the jacket. His jacket. The one she had kept all those years. The sleeves still frayed, the denim faded, but intact. I thought you might want to hang on to it, he said, voice low. Or pass it on someday. It's yours more than mine now. Claire held it against her chest, overcome with a wave of memory and meaning. Thank you, she whispered, for giving it to me. Twice. Ethan stepped closer. You said something to me once. That kindness plants seeds. Claire looked up, eyes shimmering. Well, he continued, you were the one who watered them. In the other room, Caleb turned on the old radio. A holiday song crackled through off-key and warm. He called out Claire Dance with me. Claire laughed. I think that's your dad's job. Caleb grinned. Only if he remembers how Ethan raised an eyebrow. Oh, I remember. He took Claire's hand before she could protest, leading her into the living room where the floorboards still creaked like old stories waiting to be told. They danced slowly, clumsily, to a tune no one really knew, three people no longer waiting for a miracle because they had already become one for each other. At one point, Claire leaned in and whispered, You know, you never really knocked on the wrong door. Ethan smiled, pressing his forehead to hers. No, he said. You were always the address in my prayer. I just didn't know it yet. And so, on a quiet hill in a small town under a roof where love had once only lived in memory, three hearts kept time together, not in fear, not in grief, but in hope. Because sometimes the miracle we're waiting for is the home we choose to build together. We'd love to hear from you. Where in the world are you watching from? Let us know in the comments below and share what part of the story touched you the most. If this story moved, you don't forget to subscribe for more heartwarming tales that bring hope, healing, and human connection to life. Thank you so much for spending your time with us. We truly appreciate you. Until next time, take care and keep believing in the quiet power of kindness.